Imagine this, you're on a flight, just minding your own business when a flight attendant approaches you with an attitude, asking you to leave. You're stunned, confused, and embarrassed. But what if I told you that the family being kicked off wasn't just any family? What if they were a black billionaire family that owned the very airline that just humiliated them? Get ready for one of the most unbelievable stories of wealth, power, and revenge. This is a tale you don't want to miss. It all started on a routine flight. The Johnson family, a black billionaire family with a long history of success, boarded the private jet like any other day. As the plane ascended, they settled into their seats, ready for the short trip ahead. But little did they know, their peaceful journey was about to be interrupted in the most shocking way. A flight attendant, seemingly with no regard for who they were, walked up to them with a stern expression. "You're going to have to leave," she said. The family was in disbelief. They had never been treated like this before. The flight attendant was insistent, almost cold in her tone. "You need to leave now." The Johnsons, well known in both business and social circles, couldn't fathom what was going on. They tried to reason with her, but the flight attendant wouldn't budge. "It's for the safety of the other passengers," she claimed, though it was clear to everyone that the family posed no threat. Why were they being singled out? And why so? The Johnsons remained calm, but they were starting to feel the sting of discrimination. They had always faced challenges due to their race, but never something so direct and public. As the plane began to descend, the flight attendant returned, ready to escort them off the plane. The family members exchanged confused glances, wondering if they were truly being thrown off a flight that they had every right to be on. But then, the unthinkable happened. The captain, who had been silent until now, The captain rushed toward the flight attendant and whispered something in her ear. Her face immediately turned a shade of red. The family, still standing by the door, was unsure what was happening. The captain turned to the Johnsons, his demeanor completely changing. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," he said. "You don't have to leave. Please, come back to your seats." The Johnsons were stunned. What had just happened? They were about to ask when the flight attendant, who had been so cold, sudden. As the flight continued, the family sat in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The captain returned to the cockpit, and for the remainder of the flight attendant avoided making eye contact with them. But the confusion was far from over. When the plane landed, the Johnsons were met by a company representative at the gate. "We apologize for the incident," the rep said with an uneasy smile. "We'll make sure this never happens again." The family wasn't sure. Johnsons, who were used to the corporate world's intricacies, decided to take action. They wanted answers. After all, they weren't just any family, this was their airline. They had invested millions into the very company that had humiliated them. Little did the flight attendant know, the Johnsons were the owners of this airline. Their name was on the plane, their money funded the very operations that kept it flying. The family had a history of being private about their ownership, but this eve, the Johnsons, now determined to address the disrespect they had faced, decided to make their next move. They reached out to the airline's upper management. What followed was a series of phone calls, each one escalating in intensity. The family was stunned by the lack of immediate response. How could this incident, where a flight attendant had kicked off the owners of the airline, be ignored? The Johnsons demanded a meeting with the board of directors, ready to confront the situation head-on and. As the meeting approached, the family prepared themselves for a battle. They knew the stakes were high, not only for their reputation but for the integrity of the airline they had built from the ground up. The media, however, had already caught wind of the incident. Word spread quickly, and the story went viral. Headlines blared with the shocking tale of the black billionaire family being kicked off the flight. The backlash from the public was swift. Social media erupted in outrage, calling for a When the day of the meeting arrived, the Johnsons walked into the boardroom with confidence. The board members, who had no idea that they were about to meet the very people they disrespected, were visibly nervous. The tension in the room was palpable. The Johnsons, standing tall, made it clear that this incident would not be swept under the rug. As the board members sat in silence, the family spokesperson took the lead, recounting everything that had happened. The flight attendant's actions. The CEO, who had been silent up until now, stood up and apologized profusely. "We never intended for this to happen. We are deeply sorry for the way you were treated," he said. But the Johnsons weren't there for empty apologies. They wanted accountability. "This is more than just an apology," the family spokesperson responded. "We are talking about the future of this company. You will make this right, or we'll have no choice but to reconsider our involvement." The room was silent as the wait. The meeting ended with a promise from the CEO to take swift action. The flight attendant was suspended, pending an internal investigation. But the Johnsons weren't satisfied with just that. They demanded that the airline's training procedures be revamped to address issues of racial bias and discrimination. They also made it clear that they would take legal action if the situation wasn't handled to their satisfaction. The airline, now reeling from the public fallout, had no choice but to comply. As the media coverage grew, the story of the Johnson family's mistreatment continued to dominate the news. The hashtag Justice for the Johnsons began trending, with people from all walks of life showing their support. The incident had sparked a conversation about racial discrimination and privilege in the corporate world, particularly in industries like aviation, where power dynamics were often at play. The Johnsons knew that this was their chance to make a lasting impact, not just for themselves. The airline, under intense pressure, began to make changes. They issued a public apology, acknowledging the mistake and committing to revamping their employee training programs. The CEO appeared on television, apologizing personally to the Johnson family and pledging that such an incident would never happen again. But for the Johnsons, this wasn't enough. They demanded more. The family worked closely with the airline to implement new diversity and inclusion initiatives, ensuring that the future. Meanwhile, the story of the Johnsons' experience sparked a wider conversation about the treatment of black wealth and power. It was a stark reminder that even in the world of billionaires, racial bias could rear its ugly head. Social media flooded with messages of solidarity, with many sharing their own stories of racial discrimination. The Johnsons, in their efforts to turn this painful moment into something positive, began to speak out more publicly about the issue. They used their platform to. As the public conversation shifted toward a broader discussion on race and privilege, the Johnsons found themselves at the forefront of a movement. They were invited to speak at various panels and conferences about racial discrimination, the challenges faced by black billionaires, and how to address biases within large corporations. The family used their newfound influence to drive home the importance of accountability and transparency in the corporate world. They made it clear that their fight. But even as they worked to turn the page on this painful chapter, the Johnsons knew that the fight wasn't over. While the airline had made changes and the public outrage had started to subside, they remained vigilant. They kept an eye on the company's policies, ensuring that the commitments made were more than just lip service. The Johnsons, once just quiet investors in the airline, had now become its most passionate advocates for change. And in doing so, they had turned a humiliating experience. As time passed, the Johnsons continued to keep the pressure on the airline. They were fully committed to ensuring that this story didn't fade into the background, like so many similar incidents had before. Their legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that the necessary changes were implemented. The airline's internal policies were overhauled, with a dedicated department for handling racial discrimination complaints. Employees were now required to undergo thorough anti-bias training and diversity. Despite all the changes within the airline, the media continued to cover the Johnson story. More and more individuals came forward to share their experiences of racial discrimination within the airline industry, and the conversation grew louder. The Johnsons knew they had sparked something much bigger than they had anticipated. They were leading the charge for change in an industry where, until now, racial issues had often been swept under the rug. But the family remained humble, using their eye. The Johnsons also realized that their work wasn't done once the airline made changes. They began focusing on broader initiatives, such as scholarships for Black students pursuing careers in aviation. They wanted to make sure that the next generation of Black professionals in the field would be treated with respect and given opportunities to thrive. The family partnered with various organizations and foundations to create programs aimed at breaking down the barriers that had existed for so long. Behind the scenes, the Johnsons were approached by several large corporations, eager to learn from their experience. Many CEOs and top-level executives reached out, seeking advice on how to improve diversity in their own companies. The Johnsons became sought-after voices in the business world, known not only for their entrepreneurial success but for their leadership in the fight against racial discrimination. But despite the accolades and recognition, the family remained focused on the larger goal. As the Johnsons' influence continued to grow, they were invited to key global events where they could speak on issues of race, privilege, and the responsibilities of wealthy individuals in driving social change. They used every opportunity to stress the importance of personal accountability and corporate responsibility. They were determined to change the narrative around Black wealth, showing that power could be used for good. By the time the dust settled, the Johnsons had not only held an airline. The Johnsons' journey had not only transformed the airline industry but had also left a deep impact on the public perception of Black billionaires. For many, the story was a reminder that wealth and power didn't always protect against discrimination. It opened people's eyes to the harsh realities that even the most successful Black families faced. As the Johnsons continued to push for societal change, they realized that their work was part of a much larger fight, one that spanned beyond the aviat. In the months following the airline incident, the Johnsons became more involved in advocacy for Black empowerment, working with a number of nonprofits and community organizations. They were particularly passionate about economic empowerment, teaching other Black entrepreneurs the importance of not only building wealth but also using it to create systemic change. Through their own experience, they became living proof of the idea that change could be achieved from the top down and from the bottom. As their philanthropic efforts expanded, the Johnsons took a more hands-on approach, visiting schools, giving motivational talks, and offering mentorship to young entrepreneurs of color. They shared their own journey and struggles, emphasizing that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, perseverance and self-belief were the keys to success. Their efforts inspired many, and slowly, a new wave of young leaders began to rise, leaders who were committed to driving social justice and business in. The attention the Johnsons received also led to new business opportunities. They were approached to create a series of documentaries detailing their experiences with racial discrimination and their fight for justice. The family felt that it was important to document not only their personal journey but the larger issues they were tackling. They partnered with prominent filmmakers to produce a docuseries that would air globally, reaching millions of viewers. The docuseries became an instant hit. But despite their growing fame and influence, the Johnsons remained focused on their mission. They knew that the media attention could easily distract from their true purpose. They continued to advocate for policy changes within various industries and kept pushing for greater representation and inclusivity. The Johnsons were now regarded as not just business moguls but also as activists, leading a revolution in corporate culture that prioritized fairness and equity. Their legacy was no longer due. As the Johnsons continued their advocacy, they began to see tangible changes within industries that had long been resistant to diversity and inclusion. Major companies, inspired by the Johnsons' actions, started to adopt more comprehensive diversity policies. Executives and business leaders began attending seminars on racial sensitivity and unconscious bias, and employee resource groups for marginalized communities became more common. The Johnsons knew that while progress was being made, their One of the most rewarding moments for the Johnson family came when they were invited to a White House summit on racial equity in business. There, they shared their experiences and discussed how corporations could implement real, lasting change. The summit brought together leaders from various sectors, and the Johnsons used their platform to urge everyone in the room to take responsibility for the injustices in their industries. The Johnsons' call for accountability resonated with the crowd, and in the years that followed, the Johnsons' story continued to inspire people worldwide. Their social media presence grew, with millions of followers eager to hear their latest updates on activism, business ventures, and social justice. The Johnsons used their platform not just to promote their businesses, but to push for legislative changes that would improve the lives of marginalized groups. They teamed up with politicians and community leaders, working behind the scenes to ensure that policies. Despite their busy schedule, the Johnsons continued to maintain a low profile when it came to their personal lives. They were mindful of the attention that their wealth brought, but they remained grounded, focused on their ultimate goal. Family came first, and they always made time for one another. Their private life was a sanctuary, where they could recharge and regroup before diving back into their public work. They often spoke about the importance of family unity, reminding others that no matter the Johnsons' story had come full circle. What started as a personal, humiliating experience had blossomed into a full-fledged movement for social and racial justice. The changes they had sparked in the aviation industry were just the beginning. Their advocacy had inspired a new generation of leaders who were committed to ensuring that no one would ever have to face the kind of treatment they had endured. As they looked back on their journey, the Johnsons knew that their legacy would not just be. As their influence continued to grow, the Johnsons realized they had become more than just a symbol of success. They had become icons for a movement that transcended their own experiences. They were now invited to speak at global conferences and forums, discussing not only the importance of diversity and inclusion but also the power of personal accountability. Their story had touched millions, and it was clear that their actions had made a real difference. But the Johnsons knew their work was far. One of the Johnsons' most significant achievements came when they were approached by major educational institutions. Universities reached out, asking them to help design curriculum for business courses that focused on leadership, social justice, and corporate responsibility. The family eagerly accepted the challenge. They saw it as an opportunity to shape the next generation of business leaders, teaching them how to balance profit with purpose. Through their involvement, the Johnsons were able to. By now, the Johnsons had established their own foundation, one dedicated to promoting racial equality in business and providing scholarships to students from underrepresented communities. The foundation quickly became a major player in the nonprofit world, funding initiatives that aimed to break down barriers for Black entrepreneurs and professionals. The Johnsons worked closely with grassroots organizations, ensuring that the support they offered reached those who needed it most. Their foundati. Despite their extensive work in social justice and philanthropy, the Johnsons never lost sight of their business ventures. They continued to lead the companies they had built, ensuring that their core values were reflected in every decision. Their leadership style was characterized by transparency, fairness, and a deep commitment to diversity. The Johnsons made it clear that while wealth and success were important, they were ultimately about creating lasting positive change. Their companies flow. As they approached a new chapter in their lives, the Johnsons reflected on how far they had come. From being disrespected on that fateful flight to becoming global champions of equality, their journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. They had faced immense challenges, but they had turned each obstacle into an opportunity for growth and change. Their story had reshaped the narrative around Black wealth and power, and their work had sparked a worldwide movement for fairness and justice. The Johnsons' efforts reached new heights when they were invited to collaborate with international human rights organizations. Their unique perspective, as both business leaders and activists, brought a fresh approach to tackling systemic inequality on a global scale. The family worked with these organizations to launch programs that focused on economic empowerment for marginalized communities worldwide. With their reputation for making meaningful change, the Johnsons became an integral part of. Through their partnerships with international organizations, the Johnsons were able to influence policy changes in countries where inequality was most prevalent. They attended diplomatic meetings where they advocated for laws that would ensure greater access to education, fair employment practices, and financial opportunities for disenfranchised groups. They understood that lasting change required more than just corporate efforts, it required systemic reforms at the highest levels of government. With each new initiative, the Johnsons' impact continued to grow. They helped launch a series of entrepreneurial incubators in underserved communities, providing mentorship and capital to young Black business owners. These incubators were designed to help nurture talent, break down financial barriers, and provide access to networks that had traditionally been out of reach. The Johnsons took great pride in seeing these young entrepreneurs thrive, knowing that they had paved the way for a new gene. As the years went by, the Johnsons' efforts were recognized with numerous awards, but they never allowed the accolades to distract from their mission. They remained grounded, always reminding others that the work was far from finished. Every award, every recognition was a reminder of how much had been achieved, but it also served as a reminder of the much larger battle they were still fighting. For the Johnsons, success was never about personal glory, it was about creating a world where everyone. The Johnsons' legacy began to inspire people beyond the business world. Artists, athletes, and activists all took note of the family's work and began to use their platforms to promote social justice in their own fields. The Johnsons had set a precedent that power and influence could be used to create lasting change, not just for the individual but for society as a whole. As the movement continued to gain momentum, the family watched with pride, knowing that they had sparked a revolution in the W. As the Johnsons' influence spread further, they began to see a shift in how the public viewed wealthy individuals. No longer was wealth viewed solely as a symbol of success, it was now seen as a tool for creating change. The Johnsons were recognized as pioneers in the effort to make corporate America more inclusive. Their work not only transformed the airline industry but also sent a powerful message to other wealthy families: true success is measured by the positive impact you leave behind. The family's commitment to social justice continued to deepen as they took on new projects aimed at addressing other forms of systemic discrimination. They collaborated with healthcare organizations to fight racial disparities in medical care and with law enforcement agencies to advocate for reform in the justice system. The Johnsons believed that true equality required action across all sectors of society, and they were dedicated to tackling these issues head-on, no matter how challenging. In addition to their social initiatives, the Johnsons' business portfolio continued to expand. They invested in emerging industries, such as renewable energy and technology, with the same commitment to inclusivity and social responsibility that had defined their earlier ventures. By focusing on sustainable and socially conscious investments, the Johnsons were able to build a new kind of wealth, one that benefited not just their family, but the planet and future generations as well. The family's rise to prominence sparked a larger conversation about the role of Black wealth in America. While the Johnsons were proud of their success, they never shied away from the struggles they faced to get there. They openly discussed the challenges of being Black in an industry dominated by white executives and how their personal experiences shaped their vision for a more just world. By being transparent about their journey, the Johnsons inspired others to pursue their dreams, no matter what. As the years passed, the Johnsons reflected on how much they had achieved and how far the world had come in terms of racial equality. They recognized that there was still much work to be done, but they felt hopeful for the future. The Johnsons had not only built a legacy of business success but had also become symbols of resilience and hope for future generations. Their story was a reminder that no matter the challenges, with courage, determination, and a sense of justice, anything was possible. As the Johnsons' legacy continued to grow, they found that their impact had stretched beyond the business and social realms. They began receiving invitations from universities and leadership programs, asking them to mentor and inspire the next generation of global leaders. The family happily accepted these opportunities, knowing that the future was in the hands of the youth. They continued to speak about the importance of ethical leadership, inclusivity, and using one's privilege for good. Levy. The Johnsons' story became a model for what it meant to not only achieve success but also to use that success to uplift others. They frequently worked with schools and community centers, offering scholarships and internships to students from underserved backgrounds. Their foundation grew into one of the largest educational support systems for minority students, ensuring that the doors to opportunity remained open to those who had historically been excluded. The family's efforts were now deeply As they reached the later stages of their careers, the Johnsons began to look toward the future with a new sense of responsibility. They began passing on the reins to the next generation within their family, ensuring that their values and mission would continue long after they were gone. It became clear to them that their story was just the beginning. There was a ripple effect that was already starting to take shape. The Johnsons had planted the seeds of change, and now it was up to the next lead. In the final chapter of their journey, the Johnsons stood proudly at the pinnacle of their efforts. They had turned a painful moment into a global movement, showing the world that true power lies in the ability to inspire, to challenge the status quo, and to push for a better, more inclusive future. They had never forgotten where they came from, nor had they lost sight of the battles they fought. Their legacy was not just about wealth, it was about justice, equality, and making the world a place.